I want to make a point about media and journalism, which is I don't think there's been a more vocal critic of corporate media for so long as me. I hated corporate media with all my might, all my intensity before it became known that they deserved it. And I'm not calling myself a pioneer. I'm hardly the first person to do it. I'm just saying it was a very intense focus of mine, basically for the last 20 years since I started journalism. And my hatred for corporate media has only intensified. The closer I got to it, the more intimately involved with it I became, the more of my own journalism I did, the more I interacted with them, the more I saw them, and especially when the Trump era, COVID, the 2008 financial crisis, 2003 Iraq War, the war on terror, completely exposed exactly what they are. Russiagate, all of it. And I'm always happy when they are discredited. I'm always happy when their credentials are disrespected, when they lose faith and trust on the part of the public, because all of it is what they deserve. But I always try and make the point that while I hate corporate media and the journalism they do, I'm not against journalism. I'm a huge supporter of journalism. I became a journalist because I believe in it. I have pursued journalism, sometimes with risks, angering power centers, because I believe it's such a vital part of how we have a healthy democracy. People who are maintenance people, or who work in a factory, or who are dentists, or who are pilots, or whoever, have to focus on their work for most of the day. They can't spend all day investigating and digging into the actions and statements of a politician. That's the job of a journalist. And you need journalists to be able to say, hey, what this politician is saying is lying, is a lie. What this politician is doing in secret is corrupt. And we're here to expose it. Journalism is important. It's vital. I never thought journalism, and I still don't think journalism is something that only a privileged priesthood called, quote, journalist are able to do. I think journalism is an act, not a priesthood or a profession that any individual can do. That's how the founders thought of it. Freedom of the press was put in the First Amendment. It was like freedom of speech or free exercise of religion. It wasn't for just a small group of people, freedom of the press. It was for everybody. They meant the press, the actual printing press, which, all kinds of people used, including people who weren't professional journalists, to agitate against the crown, to advocate for things they wanted. It's a right that we all have to do journalism. And I'm glad when it's understood that it's not confined to New York Times and Reuters and NBC reporters. But journalism requires an adversarial relationship with the government. Doesn't mean you hate the government. Doesn't mean you hate the people in charge of the government. Doesn't mean you always call them liars or corrupt. But it's adversarial in the sense that when they say something, your instinct as a journalist is not to immediately agree with it and say, well, if that person is saying it, it must be true because he's so trustworthy. It's to be skeptical about it and to say, you know what, I want to see proof for it first before I believe it, or before anybody should believe it. And you go and investigate it. And if you find that it's false, you say so. If you find that a policy is likely to produce outcomes different than the ones they're promising, you say so. That's just the journalistic instinct. You don't want anyone sycophantic to government, but you also don't want anybody like the corporate media was with Trump, single-mindedly and monomaniacally driven by hatred for the person, for a mission to destroy a particular presidency or a party. Both are activism and not journalism. And I say all that as a prelude to this trend that really has become centralized at the Pentagon, but is now spreading to the White House newsroom and other, the briefing room and other parts of the government, to expunge people who are in corporate media or even independent journalists and replace them with complete party sycophants, complete party loyalists or Trump loyalists. And as much as I hate corporate media, as much as I believe that they've been completely mission-driven and destroyed their own mission in trying to destroy the Trump presidency, both in the first term and the second term, the solution of replacing them with people who are excessively worshipful and reverent of the president and the administration is no better, and I would argue it's actually worse. You'd rather have a press corps excessively adversarial, even reactionary adversaries, than ones who are sycophantic and who will defend the president no matter what he does. And yet, increasingly, that's what we're getting. This all started when Pete Hegseth decided to impose a new media policy that basically said that if you work at the Pentagon, you are barred from asking people to tell you things that are classified, which is what a journalist does in all parts of the government. You don't just want to get the information that the government has authorized you to get and said that they want you to have. You want to get the information that they're hiding so you can report on what the government is doing. And you go to sources and you ask them to share with you what the government is really doing so you can report on it. But they had to sign a policy saying they would never do that. And they also had to sign a policy saying if they're going to report anything other than what the government has explicitly authorized them to distribute, they have to submit it first for pre-publication review. Here from AP, this is October 22nd. After others departed, Pentagon announces, quote, a new press corps filled with conservative news outlets. Because what happened was the media outlets, not just ABC and NBC and New York Times and Washington Post, but the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, Newsmax, pretty much everyone said, we're never going to sign this. This is basically turning ourselves into government spokespeople like we work in North Korea. We're not going to get permission from the government before we can publish something that is about classified information. We're not going to go to the government and ask for permission. That gives the government censorship power over what we're going to report. So they all lost their credentials. There's no more actual journalistic outlets inside the Pentagon. Instead, they've all been replaced, not with independent media, which I would have no problem with, but the opposite of independent media. People who are not journalists at all, they're just Trump worshipers, Trump cheerleaders, Trump supporters, which is fine. Be a Trump believer, be a Trump supporter. Every American has the right to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. People are supporters of political leaders. That's totally fine. But don't pretend then that you're part of the press, which is reporting when you've already made clear that your interest is not reporting on Trump or Pete Hegseth, but only venerating them and defending them. Here's the AP News article that goes on to explain. We can put that on the screen. Let me see. It says, here's the Pentagon Press Association statement on October 15th. Quote, today, the Defense Department confiscated the badges of the Pentagon reporters from virtually every media organization in America. It did this because reporters would not sign on to a new media policy over its implicit threat of criminalizing national security reporting and exposing those who signed it to potential prosecution. The Pentagon Press Association's members are committed to reporting on the U.S. military, but make no mistake, today, October 15, 2025, is a dark day for press freedom that raises concerns about a weakening U.S. commitment to transparency and governance, to public accountability at the Pentagon, and to free speech for all. And let me just, I think there is, yeah, so that's the end of that. So the Department of War, as Pete Hegseth and Trump are now calling it, even though that's not actually its name under the law, issued their own defense of this new policy. And this is what they said. We can put that on the screen. Memorandum for senior Pentagon leadership. Here, this is their report. Members of the news media are not required to submit their writings to DoD for approval. The receipt of unsolicited CNSI or CUI and its subsequent publication is generally protected by the First Amendment and would not on its own normally trigger denial, revocation, or non-renewal of PFAC. However, if you solicit the disclosure of such information or otherwise encourage DoD personnel to violate laws and policies concerning the disclosure of such information, such conduct may weigh in the consideration of whether you are a security or safety risk. It then goes on to say, the First Amendment does not permit journalists to solicit government employees to violate the law by providing confidential government information to ensure the safety of U.S. personnel. News media who find themselves in possession of information that appears to be CNSI or CUI should discuss those materials with the PPO prior to publication. So that's exactly what it does. If I had signed on to this, And then Edward Snowden had come to me, or another source had come to me and said, hey, I want you to know something. The NSA is doing something. The deep state is doing something extremely deceitful, illegal, and corrupt. And they are hiding their abusive, deceitful conduct behind classified or top secret markings. If I said to that person, oh, yes, I'm interested in that, give me that. Or, hey, this is interesting what you gave me. Can you give me more? I would be in violation of that policy because I would promise not to do that, even though it's basic to investigative journalism, and subject to prosecution because I signed that. And even worse, if I did get such information that is classified or top secret, meaning the government hasn't authorized it to be seen by the public, and I published it, if I didn't first go to them and give them a heads up about what I was publishing and get approval from them, I would also be subject to prosecution in violation of those rules. I would never sign those rules. No journalist of integrity would. But the Pentagon is no problem replacing all of those journalists who refuse to sign these forms and therefore lost their press credentials and their access to the press. The problem is it's being filled by a bunch of partisan loyalists. Here's someone named Cam Higbee who said this, quote, you can criticize me for not having a journalism degree, but what does it say about the folks with degrees that I replaced them at the Pentagon? No one cares if anyone has a journalism degree. I don't have a journalism degree. I went to law school. I didn't go to journalism school. Some of the most accomplished journalists on the planet didn't go to journalism school. No one thinks you have to go to journalism school to be a real journalist. Don't have journal. No one cares about that. It shows how little this person knows about the profession of journalism, that he thinks the criticism is that he doesn't have a journalism degree. But he says, okay, well, what does it say about me or the folks with degrees that I replaced them at the Pentagon? What it says is that you're a mindless follower, a cult leader, a cult member, worshiping your leader. And they know you're never going to criticize anything they do. You're never going to question them in any way. You're going to just serve as a propaganda vehicle, a vessel for them. That's what it says about you. That's why you're there. And he was responding to an ex-user who said, quote, what it says about you is you have no integrity and will say whatever the government asks you to, like the good little boy you are. Quote, information must be approved for public release by an appropriate authorizing official before it's released, even if it's unclassified, the directive states. The signature form includes an array of security requirements for credentialed media at the Pentagon. He denies that. He says, we do not need permission to post public information. Obviously, you don't need permission to post public information. That's the whole point. Public information is information the government has given to you, has said, this is what we want you to distribute. This is what we want the public to hear. So I'm sure Cam Higbee, like a good boy, will go and tell whoever his readers are or his viewers are what Pete Hegseth tells him to go and say. The guy's an idiot. He can't even follow basic critiques. The critique isn't that he has a journalism degree, that he doesn't have a journalism degree. And the critique isn't that there's a policy forcing him to get approval to publish public information. He has to get approval before he publishes non-public information, information the government's trying to hide. That's the only information worth reporting as a journalist. And no journalist, not even the worst, most decrepit ones in corporate media, would go and submit to the government what they want to say. There's a journalist named Ken Delanian, really not a journalist, TV personality, who works at NBC. He had worked at AP for a while. And previous to that, he worked at the LA Times, and he covered the intelligence community. And at The Intercept, we did a Freedom of Information Act request for all communications between the CIA and journalists. And they had no privilege to claim, so they had to give it to us. In these emails, we saw Ken Delanian, while at the LA Times, sending the CIA drafts of articles he was preparing to publish, saying, hey guys, I'm about to publish this, let me know what you think. And they would come back and say, change this, change that, and he would do it. He was serving as a CIA stenographer, which is what all these people are there to do as well. Another giant of American journalism who got a press credential is Laura Loomer. And she was responding to claims that she's restricted in what she can say. And this is what she said on X, quote, it's not true. I've been asking all types of critical questions of the Pentagon this week, and they still let me inside the briefing. We are allowed to ask whatever we want. There are 2 rules. Do not publish classified information, and don't walk inside DOW officials' private spaces to invade their space. It's crime to publish classified information. So why is that such a hard rule to follow? Okay. That is utterly false. It is not a crime to publish classified information. How can you possibly purport to be a member of the media or whatever she thinks she is and not know this? Imagine if it were a crime to publish classified information. There'd be no journalism in the United States. There would only be government spokespeople. She's an imbecile. Journalists publish classified information every day. The crime is if you work inside the government, you're under a legal obligation not to disseminate classified information to people unauthorized to receive it. That's a crime. The source can commit a crime. But it's not a crime to publish classified information. That was why we were able to do the Snowden reporting without being prosecuted, even though they wanted to. It's why the New York Times and the Washington Post could publish the Pentagon Papers. It's why WikiLeaks was able to publish all of the information it published, and why it was such a scandal when the government tried to criminalize Julian Assange for publishing classified information, given that that is the essence of investigative journalism. You may remember before we did the Snowden reporting, just a couple months before, there was a major scandal because Eric Holder, when he was the Attorney General for Obama, was trying to find out who the sources were for Fox News' reporting of classified information, including James Rosen, and they got a hold of his phone records, his parents' phone records, trying to find his sources. But the reason it was a scandal is because journalists aren't committing crimes by publishing classified information. It's critical. Otherwise, all the government has to do is put classified labels on everything they want to hide. And then journalists are only allowed to report what you're told to report. And Laura Loomer is saying that's what she's there to do. And that's why she has that press credential.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.